And I think they are more important leaderless times. We're seeing the rise of populist movements and strongman leaders, not necessarily because they are the great leaders of the day, but because I think people are desperately lacking for meaning and purpose and to feel like we're going somewhere. We want to be led. People want to be led. Whether it's young people who are protesting on their school campuses, or whether during COVID it was anti-vaxxers or anti-maskers, whether it was Brexit or, I think they're all very much the same, whether it's the left side of politics or the right side of politics, which is they're all basically anti-establishment movements. And you usually see anti-establishment when people feel forgotten and left out by whatever the establishment is doing. In other words, they perceive that the establishment are looking after themselves. So I think we live in visionless and leaderless times. That's the big challenge of the day. And so we find ourselves reactive to each other and against things, but few people can say what they're for.
So many of my guests have come here and then after the conversation have turned to me and said they're concerned about their younger child. Often they reference their younger son because they talk about the rise in the sort of toxic male influences online. And it kind of coincides with what you just said about looking for leaders. And now, some of those leaders that we're looking for are offering us a blueprint of what it is to be a responsible, stable human that involves buying a Lamborghini, having multiple wives and showing up in a certain way. And I've had so many conversations. In fact, one of my guests the other week brought me a dossier called Heroic Masculinity. And it was a woman, and she says, please, can you have more conversations about this subject, and passed it to me. And the reason she's saying that is because she's concerned her son is growing up in a world where he's not going to know what it means to be a good man.
Well, who are the role models? Like, who are the strong male or female role models? Who are teaching us values? Who are teaching us service? Who's teaching us kindness and empathy? In leaderless times and lost times, we will follow things that make us feel good, right? Wealth makes us feel good. Conspicuous consumption makes us feel good because you get that hit of serotonin and dopamine. This is the reason why I've become really fascinated by the concept of friendship. I haven't written a book in many years, and so I've started writing again. And I'm writing a book with a friend, my friend Will Guidera, who wrote Unreasonable Hospitality. And we've decided to write about friendship because when you think about all of the problems that we're facing today, mental fitness, mental health, rising suicide, rising anxiety, depression, addiction, take your list, even people's obsession with longevity. And everybody's looking for a biohack for all those things. And there's one biohack that's better than all of the things that we're trying, which is friendship. People with close friendships are healthier, they live longer, they have better coping mechanisms, which means they better deal with stress. And I'll give you an amazing thing. So there's a very famous experiment that was done, I think in the 60s. All of our sort of understanding of addiction is based on this study. It's basically they put a rat in a cage and they gave it plain water or they gave it water laced with drugs. And it tasted both. It got addicted to the water laced with drugs and eventually drank that water until it died, right? And so this became our understanding of addiction. Many years later, not that long ago, another scientist said, hold on, there's a problem with this experiment. A rat, like a person, is a social animal. And you took this social animal and you put it by itself and then offered it drugs. So you created loneliness and then you offered the drug, right? If you want to make it a good experiment, you have to create the right context. So what it did, they created something called Rat Park, where basically what they did is they created a new cage filled with things to do and mazes and wheels and other rats, and they were social. And the rats tasted both waters, the one laced with morphine and the one that was just plain. They drank enough of the morphine-laced one to get addicted, and then they stopped. It diminishes how much they drank, and they only drank the plain water. So basically, when you have healthy relationships, we are less likely to become addicted. When we are lonely, we are more likely to create addiction. right? Friendship is the thing that actually protects us. And then if you look at, even if you do become addicted, right? Let's take the worst case scenario. So let's look at alcoholism, right? Alcoholism, we know that to beat alcoholism, you join AA, community. And everybody talks about the importance of community and finding your community, right? But Alcoholics Anonymous knows that there's these 12 steps, and if you master 11 of the 12 steps, the disease is probably going to get you. But if you master the 12th step, the final step, you're more likely to overcome the disease. So what's the 12th step? The 12th step is to help another alcoholic, to become someone's sponsor. In other words, to become a friend. In other words, community, you find community, but then the final step of beating the disease is a friend, where you replace the community with a friend, and you have both. And we think community is the thing, but it's not enough. Yes, you can create belonging with community. And people, where we started talking about it, where people are latching onto these anti-establishment populist movements. It's giving them a sense of community. It's giving them a sense of shared purpose with a group of people, right? But it's also providing new social connections. One of the things we don't do is we are not good at making friends, and we're not good at looking after friends. There's an entire industry to help people like us become better leaders. I'm a part of it. I write books about it, right? There's an entire industry to help people be better parents. And if you're going to have a child, if you've got a child with problems, you read all the books about how to be a better parent. There are no books, or precious few books, to teach us, and there's no industry to teach us how to be a better friend. Like, are you a good friend? Are you a good friend to your friends? Are your friends good to you? Who do you call people when you are stuck and down? Or do you make TikTok videos by yourself? Which, and you get, literally, people who are depressed make TikTok videos by themselves. I don't know how many times they reshoot that either. To post it to get the validation for their feelings. But to call a friend and say the same thing you're struggling with is actually more difficult.
Why doesn't the industry exist? Because typically...
we take it for granted.
Yeah. So the demand isn't there for those kinds of things.
But that's the problem, which is I think the demand is there. We don't realize it, right? Like, we know that our relationships fail and our marriages fail, so there's an entire industry to help us maintain better relationships. Well, friendships fail, and we think we have friends, yet we still struggle and feel lonely. If you have good friendship, you will not feel lonely. You may have moments of loneliness, and in those periods, you will pick up the phone and say to your friend, I need you, I'm lonely. And your friends will be there. You will feel not alone, right? Or, and you and I have talked about this, about you will feel that someone will get in the mud with you. Mm. And I think the problem is we don't give intention to friendship. So think about it. And you and I are both guilty of this. In fact, I would argue that everybody's guilty of this, which is we've got plans booked with a friend. Let's call it a lunch. A work thing comes up. We call up the friend, I got a work thing. And the reason we keep bumping our friends is because they'll understand. They're our friends. So why aren't we prioritizing our friendships? Why aren't we saying to the work thing, I'm sorry, I've got a thing. If we had another meeting, we would say, sorry, I've got an appointment, I can't make it. So why don't we treat our friends with the same intentionality that we treat any other meeting? So one of the things that Will did for a friend that I thought was genius, brilliant, beautiful, Will Godera, who I'm writing the book with. Will's friend's dad died. Will texted him and said, I feel for you. I know what you're going through. I lost my mom at an early age. I'm sure you're being inundated with calls and texts, so I'm not going to call you today. But what I will do is I will call you every single day at 9:45 a.m. Do not feel obligated to pick up. I don't mind if you don't. But when you're ready, know that I'm calling you. And for the next, I think it was 3 months, 8 months, something, he called every single day at 9:45 a.m. And for the first week, his friend didn't pick up at all. And then after the first week, he picked up every day, and they talked every day for months. Like, think about the intentionality that somebody who loves and cares about you so much that they will call you every single day at 9:45 just so that you can see their name pop up in the caller ID to know that you're not alone. I mean, it brings me to tears just thinking about it. Like, How many of us are that good a friend? I want friends like that. Here's a good question. Like, what's a friend? Like, what makes a good friend? Like, I don't even know if we have a definition of that. I've been asking people, and somebody said to me, well, somebody who's there for you to support you in the hard times. That's a real friend, right? And I got thinking, and I talked to somebody else. She has a friend who she calls Mr. Schadenfreude because he seems to love when things go wrong. So in hard times, he's always there. He's always there in hard times. He gives the shoulder to lean on. He's giving advice. But in good times, he's nowhere to be seen. And so what happens is it creates this horrible sort of codependent relationship that you want to keep the hard times because that wonderful human being is always there, so you never want to let go, and you become codependent. And so you realize that there's something called a fair-weathered friend who's only there in the good times, but be equally cynical and suspicious of the foul-weathered friends who's only there in the hard times because somehow it makes them feel good about themselves, but they're not there for the good times. And so you realize what's the value of good time versus bad time. So yes, you and I have friends that in hard times we would call them. But I would bet money that you have even fewer friends that you want to text out of the blue and say, I won an award. Right? Think about that. Like, if something goes wrong, I've got a group of friends, I've probably got a dozen people I could say, I need your help. Things have gone horribly wrong. I need your advice. But if something amazing happens to me, that number probably shrinks down to 4. That I'm going to text out of the blue and go, something amazing happened today, and not feel like I'm bragging, not feel like I'm trying to overwhelm them or prove them that I'm better than them, but knowing that they will be so happy for me. And so I've started thinking that maybe a friend isn't just the person who's there for you in the hard times, but the person you can go to in the great times. Think about that. I have fewer friends that I can go to when things go perfectly than I would go to when things go wrong. So are those my true friends? So this is on the journey I'm on. I'm trying to understand what friend means, and I'm trying to understand the responsibility we have to look after those friends. You look at all the longevity studies, all the blue zone work. Sure, they eat healthy. Sure, they walk a lot, but they also eat with each other. Whereas you look at some of the people who are promoting sort of longevity and all of those biohacks and how you have to exercise the certain way and eat the certain way, you'll find a lot of them are pretty unhappy people and pretty lonely people. I don't think they're going to live very long, right? So here's a crazy, crazy one. Physiologically, right? What are the most important organs to keep strong for longevity? Like, we know the data, right? So I'll tell you what they are, right? Number 1, heart, obviously. That makes perfect sense, right? You got to have a healthy heart if you want to live a long time, right? Second one, lungs. Got to have healthy lungs to live a long time. Cardio and all the rest of it, right? Don't smoke. Like, we know that. Makes perfect sense. Do you know what the third most important organ is?
I don't know. I was going to say the brain, but...
The thighs. Thigh muscles are the so if you have a healthy heart, healthy lungs, and healthy thighs, statistically, you're more likely to live longer. I know, I said the same thing. Thighs? Do you want to know why? Because historically, thighs are the most important muscle responsible for what? Motion, walking. Right? Not exercise, social, going to visit your friends. Before there were cars, before there were trains, we had to walk to go visit our friends. And so people who are mobile, if you're more mobile, you're more likely to maintain friendships, which means you're likely to live longer. So the 3 most important organs to keep healthy historically as human beings, heart, lungs, and thighs for mobility, thighs for sociability, which I think is amazing that we never thought about. So all of these things that, technology has interrupted, mass transportation, cars, social media, all of these things, they've interrupted our ability to make friends, proper friends where you can look each other in the eye. You and I could do this over Zoom. It wouldn't feel the same. So in the mid-1980s, a theologian named James Carsey wrote this little book called Finite and Infinite Games, in which he defines these 2 kinds of games. Finite games, which have known players, fixed rules, and agreed upon objectives. Football, right? There's always a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the objective is to win the game. And then there's infinite games, Infinite games are defined as known and unknown players. You don't necessarily know who all the other players are. The rules are changeable. You can play however you want. And the objective is to perpetuate the game, to stay in the game as long as possible. What I find so fascinating about this idea when I first learned about it is we are players in multiple infinite games every day of our lives. There's no such thing as being the winner in your marriage, you know. There's no such thing as winning global politics, and there's definitely no such thing as winning business. Business is an infinite game. And yet, when we listen to the language of too many leaders, they talk about being number one, being the best, and beating their competition. Based on what? There's no agreed upon objectives, there's no agreed upon timeframes. And so what ends up happening is you have people building organizations and leading with a finite mindset, playing to win, in a game where there's no such thing as winning. And when we play with a finite mindset in an infinite game, there's a few very predictable and consistent outcomes, amongst which include the decline of trust, the decline of cooperation, the decline of innovation, all of which contribute to the eventual demise of the organization itself. And so what I wrote about is what it means to lead with an infinite mindset, because we teach leadership as if it were a finite game. You know, people start business with the goal of winning or being number one, and that's a problem because that's impossible. So what I wrote about in the infinite game is leading with an infinite mindset.
So talk to me about why revenue is a mistake, because as a business leader, when you walk in, that actually seems like an agreed upon metric. Certainly if you're playing to Wall Street, understanding your price per share, like what that means, the value that you're adding to shareholders. Like, I think most people at that level of business would say, what do you mean? We all know what the scoreboard is.
There's nothing wrong with revenues. There are two currencies in the infinite game, will and resources. Resources is money. You need money to stay in the game, but you need the will of the people as well. And the problem is that when we organize to win, that means the score is more important than the inspiration and motivation that people have to give their blood, sweat, and tears. And when we prioritize resources before will, that's a problem. I've never met a CEO that doesn't believe their people are important. The problem is where on the priority list. You know, you've been to any number of presentations where they put their priorities on the wall. You know, number one, growth. Number two, shareholder value. Number three, our customer. Number four, our employees. There it is. See, I do care about our people. And the reality is, as social animals, we want to work for and we're willing to give our blood, sweat, and tears to leaders who understand that the balance of those two essential currencies, the balance of those two things is will has to come before resources. And that doesn't mean 90-10. When I talk about putting people before profit, you know, people freak out, which is ridiculous. You need fuel for the car to go. Money is fuel for the organization, of course. Even if there's a leaning, if it's 51-49, there has to be a slight leaning towards people, because there will always be decisions that a company has to make in which those two cannot both be supplied, and one will have to be sacrificed. The question is, which will you always prioritize? Let me give you a hypothetical example to make my point. Two CEOs. The first CEO says, our number one priority is growth. And of course our people are important, because if we take care of our people, we will meet and exceed our financial goals. Second CEO says, our number one priority is our people. And if we take care of our people, we will always meet and exceed our financial goals. Which one would you rather work for?
I don't want to prioritize.
I mean, it's obvious, right? It's obvious. So this is what it means to prioritize will over resources. It has, of course, money matters, but the people matter more. People who are willing to give their blood, sweat, and tears make for better, more profitable companies. People who are only there for their own selfish needs and would be willing to jump ship as soon as they get a better offer, they're not the best people to help build a company for the long term. We can throw money at people which will last for a while, and you can make a company look successful for a while, but it doesn't mean it can last. We can't judge a ship by how well the crew performs in calm waters. We judge a ship by how well the crew performs in rough waters. And the problem is is in good times, we don't use all that extra money to take care of the people. We use it to distribute, and then when hard times come, sometimes there's not enough padding, and the culture hasn't been fostered over that time. But that is the irony, which is when we lead with an infinite mindset, and the leaders that do lead with an infinite mindset have disproportionately more successful companies, more innovative companies, more profitable companies, all of which are strong enough to last for a very, very, very long time. And not because they just have the financial wealth to weather storms, but the company continues to grow and innovate and reinvent itself so that it's relevant in the face of new technology and changing tastes and politics in the world. So that is the great irony. But it has to be genuine, meaning to say that I care about my people because they're a means to an end. It's like we only like you because you help us make money. Makes us not only feel used, but that we're a mechanism for somebody else's success. Where when we say we care about our people and money is the mechanism by which we can take care of people, the more money we make, the more we can take care of our people and serve our customers, it has a profound impact on our desire to give more.
Yeah, it's that's something that in founding impact theory, so I really learned at Quest, you're only as good as what you write down when you start scaling. And really having to crystallize it and put something down, it really does make your values insanely clear. And I started thinking a lot about safety and trust, which are two of like the big pushes in your book. And I'd love to know, like, what do you see as the difference between the way that safe is being used now is like safe space versus the way that you talk about safety in the book? Too, are they one and the same? Do you differentiate from a safe space? Like, how do you think about safety?
It has all those definitions. I mean, we want to feel safe at work, which means we feel that we can be ourselves. It means that we feel safe enough to raise our hands and say, I made a mistake, or I don't feel qualified for the position you've given me, I need more training, or I'm struggling at home, it's affecting my work, I'm scared, I need help. And to say any of those things with the confidence that our boss or any of our colleagues would rush to support us. Because if we don't create those psychologically and sometimes physically safe spaces, but those psychological safe spaces, what we end up is with a group of people who come to work every day lying, hiding, and faking. They're hiding mistakes. They are not admitting if they don't know how to do their jobs. They will never admit that they don't know something, for fear that it makes them vulnerable, for fear that it maybe makes them the weak link, that they'll find themselves on some short list at the next round of layoffs. And the problem is how do you run a successful organization that's supposed to sustain over the long term, thrive over the long term, if people are literally hiding things that go wrong, not admitting that they don't know how to do their jobs, and never admitting they need help? That doesn't last. That doesn't last. And the problem is when someone leads with a finite mindset, where they attempt to incentivize performance, and by the way, you can't incentivize performance, you can only incentivize behavior, then bad things eventually happen.
That's interesting. Talk to me more about why can't you incentivize performance, and how do incentives end up influencing behavior?
Well, you can't incentivize performance because somebody has to do something to achieve that performance. There's a cause and effect. You can't incentivize an effect, you can only incentivize the cause that would hopefully yield that effect, which is behavior. So if I say to you, I will give you a massive bonus if you hit a certain target at the end of the year, no matter what you're incentivizing is that I will do certain things to achieve that goal that you've set for me. But the problem is when we apply excessive amounts of pressure, and it's at all costs, like my very livelihood depends on that, it can accidentally incentivize some quite unseemly behaviors, like hoarding information, right? Because this is what gives me my value, and I don't want to share information or things that I've learned with my colleagues and coworkers, which is madness. Or unethical behavior, stabbing other people in the back. And this is one of the problems with, I think, our modern business today, which is too much of business is run right now with an excessive amount of finite thinking. Now, there are always finite games within the infinite game. The infinite game, however, provides the context. And without that infinite mindset, all you have is win, 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 which is unsustainable. An infinite game is not a series of finite games. It's unsustainable because nobody has that energy, and there's no such thing as a perfect growth chart.
Simon, thank you for joining us today. And we're going to have a kind of an informal conversation, and we might even have some time for some questions from the audience. So
Absolutely.
Can you share your origin story? What What's your hero origin story? How'd you come to be this expert on leadership?
So I'm not an expert on leadership.
An authority.
Let's start there. I don't think anybody's an expert on anything. I'm a student of leadership.
Well
Still
said.
got lots of learn and I still got a lot to learn and still learning. My origin story is not dissimilar, I think, to a lot of people to our careers, which was an accident. I didn't expect to be doing anything that I'm doing. It started out of pain. I had a small business, and many of the people in this room will know the statistics in the United States, which is over 90%, well into the 90th percentile, small businesses will fail in the first 3 years. Well, I survived 3 years, which means I had now joined a very small elite group in America called an entrepreneur. And my 4th year in business was awful. For some reason, I'd lost the passion. And I was very embarrassed by this because superficially everything looked good. And yet I didn't want to wake up and go to work anymore. And so all of my energy went into pretending that I was happier, more successful, and more in control than I felt. Which, if you've ever been in a dark place, pretending that you're happy makes you go even darker. And it wasn't until a dear friend of mine came to me and said, something's wrong, something's different, did I come completely clean. It lifted this huge weight off my shoulders, and now all that energy that I went to lying, hiding, and faking could now go into finding a solution. And the solution that I found was this thing called the why. I knew what I did, I knew how I did it, but I didn't know why. I became obsessed with this thing called the why. I learned my why, but more important, I learned to help others find theirs. And I would help my friends, and they would find renewed passion in their work. They would sometimes take entrepreneurial ventures themselves. And people just kept inviting me, and I just kept saying yes. And the rest, as they say, is history. Of course. I mean, I wake up every single morning to inspire people to do the things that inspire them. So together, each of us can change our world for the better. And I live my life with a very clear vision as well. I imagine a world, you said a little bit of it up front, I imagine a world in which the vast majority of people wake up every single morning inspired, feel safe wherever they are, and end the day fulfilled by the work that they do. And I've committed my career and my life to advancing towards that vision.
So what do most of us get wrong in leadership?
When you say what do most people get wrong in leadership, I think leadership is a misunderstood skill set. First of all, it absolutely is a skill set. There's no such thing as a natural-born leader. Even the leaders that appear to have natural capacity, I guarantee they learned it when they were younger. They had a mentor, a parent, a coach, a guardian, somebody that helped them learn these skills. Number one, leadership is nothing about being in charge. It's the awesome responsibility to see those around us rise. It's about taking care of those in our charge. The closest analogy I can give to being a great leader is like being a great parent. Yes, I know you don't get to pick your team sometimes, but you don't get to pick your children either. And yet you show up with love every day. And you work tirelessly to see that they will gain the skills and the confidence to do well and excel in their lives. And great leaders are doing exactly the same thing. And leadership is all about human skills. And leaders who become great leaders, it's because they study leadership. They're obsessed with it. They read books about it, they watch talks about it, they read articles about it, and when you go out with them, all they want to do is talk about it. They're obsessed with the concept. Just like parents. There's no such thing as an expert parent, but you read articles, you read books, you talk to other parents, and you solve problems along the way.